Hey guys, it's Richie the Whiz Kid here from the Best Darn Diddly Review Show, and I'm here to talk to you about PopThreads.com, your number one source for finding awesome nerdy t-shirts. Are you sick from not knowing what to wear when you go out with all your friends on the weekends? Well, don't have a cow, man. Go to PopThreads.com, and if you use the code Simpsons at checkout, you can save 15% on all your t-shirt needs.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons, or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as Mr. Most Days Off, and today, just 1 week removed from the epic episode Marge vs. the Monorail, we get yet another very great but very, very different Simpsons episode to talk about in Selma's Choice. And joining me to discuss this episode once again, your co-host with the most, Richie the Whiz Kid. How are you today, Rich?
I'm groovy, baby. I want to trip like Lisa does in this episode, right?
Right? I want what she's having.
But yeah, this episode, I'll admit, is one that plays a little bit better today than it did in my memory. It was never one of my favorite episodes because it revolved around Selma. Because typically things that revolve around Patty or Selma, I'm just kind of not that gung-ho about. But this had a lot of great moments in it. And again, like we talked about last week or the week before, it's one of those episodes where it has some jokes in there that you don't remember being tied to this particular episode, but that are great Simpson memories. So I was happy to see some of that in this one. But we'll get into that as we always do. For now, I'll throw it back to you, the man, the myth, the mail order husband. It is Miles.
Hey, I do look exactly like my picture. You mentioned this being a heavy Selma episode, Selma and Patty, and something I want to point out is this episode was written by David Stern, and you may recall talking about him all the way back when we discussed the episode Principal Charming with Dr. Andrew Briseño, another very heavy Patty and Selma episode. That was actually his second episode written. His first was Homer Alone, which was a Marge-centric episode in a lot of ways. And this was his third, so he kind of took a knack to the Bouvier family, and he even said that he did this episode because he thought it was important to show how broad the Simpsons universe was, and he had seen a lot of episodes coming through that were Bart-centric and Homer-centric, and he just wanted to do something different and just show that there is a lot more story to tell outside of the core Simpsons family, and that the Simpsons universe was a lot more vast than just the Simpsons themselves. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point that he made, and I think that we'll see more of that to come later down the road with some of the additional Marge, Patty, Selma, and Bouvier heavy family episodes. This episode, however, Selma's Choice, did debut on January 21st, 1993. The chalk gag for this one was, "I will not yell, she's dead," during roll call. I can just totally see Bart doing this. I also really like the couch gag. As the Simpsons ran into the living room, you could see there was a net on the floor, and sure enough, it sprang right as the family was above it, and I couldn't help but think to myself, man, where's Master Splinter when you need him?
Ha ha ha, I made another funny.
For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, in the movie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the turtles do in fact get caught up in a very similar net, and Master Splinter manages in his expert skill to shoot an arrow through the rope holding up the net. It's quite comical. Great flick if you haven't seen it.
Even though two of his students have sharp edges on their weapons.
Well, you know, they were tied up. They couldn't get to him for some reason. Yeah. But anyway, moving back to The Simpsons, this episode opens up with Lance Murdoch, the stuntman, setting up to do a jump over 16 flaming school buses. And he makes it absolutely no problem. Looks like an absolute pro until he misses the exit and drives his motorcycle straight into a wall.
Missed it by that much.
They still congratulate him on a stunt accomplished and ask him with his, mangled body, what is he going to be doing next? And he declares, I'm going to Duff Gardens. And this kind of transitions into a commercial for Duff Gardens with Lance Murdoch, complete in body cast, riding roller coasters and visiting
Whiplash.
all of the great attractions, such as the washing machine, which basically just spins you around and squirts water and soap at you, and the beer aquarium with the happiest fish in the whole wide world. And I love, you see these poor fish swimming around, and they just look absolutely miserable swimming in beer.
Super drunk. I like the part where it showed Lance Murdoch riding the Whiplash. He goes, Whiplash will be completed in 1994. And it shows the roller coaster has no end, and Lance Murdoch just falls off of it screaming.
But it's the most ridiculous thing, because they complete the entire hill, and you could see that they completed a major portion of the downhill, but they just left this little tiny gap at the very, very top. That seems, I'm not an engineer, but that does not seem like the brightest way to build a roller coaster in my eyes.
Well, they said it'll be completed in 1994, so...
True, and what, it's already, that's only a year away. I mean, this is January of 93, so there's a little bit of time to go. It didn't seem like they had a year's worth of work left, though, is what I'm saying.
They're going to take their time. Earn that money.
The Simpson clan is not taking any time. They've already decided they are going to Duff Gardens. Homer reminds the kids when they buy tickets that they're under 6 years old, and he's a college student.
Good man, that Homer.
To be fair, we used our college IDs to get discounts on movies for years after we dropped out.
Oh, there was times where my face was actually, like, etched off the ID because it was so old, and they would still take it for a little while.
That theater over there by North Texas, man, $3 movies for a while. I mean, you can't beat that.
And we would headed that way less than 5 minutes before the movie started, because when you're with Miles, you always make it in time.
It's the rule.
And you never die.
Don't you worry about it. Unfortunately, all the fun is ruined by mean old Marge, who decides they're not going to Duff Gardens this day, all because Aunt Gladys had to go off
Great
and
Aunt
die.
Gladys. Which makes it even further removed from the immediate family.
I love how Bart's trying to remember who this is, and he's like, oh yeah, does she have the tall, blue, puffy hair? No. This woman looked more like your Aunt Patty. And Bart then actually remembers and it kind of cringes and he's like, oh.
Oh, yeah, there she is.
My favorite part, though, is when they get this news, both Lisa and Bart accept it for what it is. Lisa's like, oh, how tragic that Stinks will have to reschedule the Duff Gardens trip. And Bart is like, what are you going to do? Whine over something you can't change? And then you cut over to Homer, whining about something he can't change, acting like an absolute child. And when Marge actually scolds him for acting childish, he's like, I'm not whining, I'm mourning.
Yeah. There are a lot of good group quotes in this episode. Like, I found myself having to do multiple lines for different people talking in this one to get everything down, and I really enjoyed that.
Well, because of the nature of the show being so heavily involved with the Bouvier family, it was actually a lot of work for Julie Kavner, who at certain times, I believe they said, had as many as 5 characters interacting with each other at once in this episode.
Wow, I didn't even think about that. Hey, she's the whole Bouvier family, isn't she?
Yeah, she sure is. Julie Kavner wasn't actually on the DVD commentary herself, but Matt Groening, Al Jean, and Mike Reese, as well as David Stern and Jim Reardon all were. And they all talked about how she actually has different cues or different little psychological differences for Patty and Selma, and she considers Patty to be a little bit more brutish. She's not as optimistic as Selma and slightly more masculine, whereas Selma has just a hint of femininity to her, disguised under the low growls and cigarette rasp.
It's crazy how, like, it's almost like stuff that's going to happen years down the road, like Patty being gay, that, like, it's almost like the blueprint's already been put in there for it. And maybe the fact that Julie Kavner does things like that help the writers deter to those kind of storylines later on in the series.
That'd be a fascinating interview to have with some of the showrunners to know exactly how they got to that character development and at which point they knew. Because it seemed pretty early on that there was, at least like you mentioned, hints that it was going to go that direction. And then I can't remember what episode it is, but I know it's not that long down the road. It's in the first half of the series, at least, that she actually comes out publicly. Or at least to her family. Publicly in the sense that, as Simpsons fans, we know she comes out.
To get that party started.
So Aunt Gladys did die, and they are on their way to the funeral instead of Duff Gardens. And in the car, they are singing songs that may be questionable for your way to a funeral.
If you don't mind, we're on our way to a funeral.
You're right. Ding dong, the witch is dead.
Which old witch?
The wicked witch. Homer.
I won't lie. I busted out laughing when Homer started that song. Like, it's for somebody who acts so stupidly all the time. He was very quick on the cleverness of the songs.
In a lot of ways, I think the joke was that he wasn't necessarily even thinking about it in context with her. He's just so absent-minded or dim-witted that he didn't even really connect the fact that might be taken as a slight against the Aunt Gladys. The deceased. Because if you remember later, he gets tricked by his own brain. Where he tells a joke in his own head, but then starts laughing about it out loud.
Just says the punchline out loud.
Homer is actually in his head when after they pick up Patty and Selma they're all talking about how her legend will live on forever, and Homer in his head goes, yeah, the legend of the dog-faced woman. But then he starts laughing out loud. He actually says, ha ha, dog-faced woman.
Dog-faced woman.
Homer! One of many times he gets scolded by Marge in this episode. I do want to say, though, despite the fact that Homer is kind of buffoon and very thoughtless or careless when it comes to what he's saying about the recently deceased, it is very clear to me that he had good intentions, at least, when it came to trying to put on a friendly face and be nice to Patty and Selma, because he actually gets out of the car and hugs them, and they react with, like, oh my god, he's hugging me, what do we do? Just try to get
pretend it's MacGyver.
Yeah. Which is a little bit weird, because isn't MacGyver kind of a sex symbol to them?
Yeah. That's what they're saying, though. Imagine it's somebody you like hugging you.
Yeah, but I would think that you would want it to be more like, pretend it's like Santa Claus, not somebody that you wanted to have sex with.
I think they're just trying to take it from the worst to the best possible scenario.
I dig it. But yeah, Homer even is nice enough to pack their bags for him into the car. He's not very thoughtful when it comes to his kids. He actually crushes Bart, who complains about it. When he mentions Lisa's not complaining, we see that's because she's so pressed up against the glass that she can't. Partway to the funeral, Patty and Selma decide they need to stop. They actually stop at the buzzing neon sign diner, where Homer is trying to keep himself entertained with a children's menu, but the maze keeps proving too difficult, as we can see by the many, many copies wadded up into balls and thrown angrily on the floor.
Sir, would you like another placemat? Yes, please. Please. He says it all gentlemanly.
It's very quick, but I actually really love, he keeps, at least when we see it, he's taking the maze and he ends up in the alligator's mouth, which is, of course, a trap. But right before he gets to the alligator, he could have made one additional turn and he would have gotten to the pot of gold, which I assume is the prize he was after.
I mean, technically he got out of the maze, just wrong exit, I guess.
You should also take note of the waitress taking orders, because we may see her again down the road. While at the diner, Marge decides she wants to have a moment to think back and remember her Aunt Gladys. She has a flashback to a time that her aunt was watching her and her sisters play by the lake. They jumped off of a dock and they were holding hands, spinning in circles underwater. And that's when Marge remembers, oh wait, that was Prince of Tides. Which, Prince of Tides was actually a very popular movie at the time, starring Nick Nolte and Barbra Streisand, that was based on a novel. The DVD commentary mentioned that it was probably a lot more relevant back when this episode first aired.
I can say I never saw it, so.
I never saw it. I will say this, I watched the preview, which you can find on IMDb. It's about 3.5-4 minutes long. The scene that they spoofed in this episode is in the preview, and for what it's worth, it actually looks like a pretty decent little flick. I mean, it's definitely like a chick flick or like I don't know, like an emotional-ish movie, but it doesn't look like the worst filth I've ever seen Hollywood produce.
But a 3 to 4 minute preview, I mean, so they've always been ruining movies with previews.
Yeah, it really felt excessively long, actually, and it gave a lot of the story away. It's a romance between, like I said, Nick Nolte and Barbra Streisand, and there's a bunch of weirdness involved as
I would
well.
like to see a movie with them being a love interest in Now.
I would like to see
That'd
where
be
Nick
funny.
Nolte falls in love with Mega Streisand.
And then paints her. That wasn't a Titanic reference, people. That was an Entourage reference.
You're thinking
Gary
of,
Busey.
of Gary Busey.
Yeah, my bad.
And admittedly, when I first watched this preview, I thought for a split second it was Gary Busey instead of Nick Nolte.
Yeah.
And I got really excited.
Because
I would see that movie.
Yeah. I'm going to paint you right here to find the intricacies between the lines. And I'm talking about the lines in your skin, not on the painting.
They're back on the road. They're back on the road, and the kids are entertaining themselves by playing the counting game, which Marge thinks is nice, but then it pans out, and you can see that they're actually counting the suitcases falling off the top of the car.
Weren't they up to like 6 or 7 when they actually showed them?
That's a lot of luggage going missing. We're finally at the funeral, and the priest is giving the eulogy and saying things like, he was a good man, he lived a good life, and finally, after many, many uses of male pronouns, somebody comes out and lets the guy know that that is in fact a woman, and his reaction is fucking priceless. Dear Lord, that's a woman? Well, most of what I said can be salvaged.
What I like, did you see the funeral sign when they pulled in? The funeral sign says, "We put the fun in funerals."
Oh, God. That's awesome. Patty actually interrupts and takes over for the guy who's clearly got no knowledge of who this woman was, so she wanted to speak about her aunt herself. I love how under her breath she mentions, and this eulogy better not show up on the bill.
Always about that bottom line.
She starts her speech out by saying Aunt Gladys wasn't a rich woman, which fled out pretty much the entire church. Almost everybody left at that point, which is kind of terrible. She did mention that she was rich in spirit, which brought one man back to the pews, but it was just because he forgot his hat, and then he quickly left again.
I feel kind of similar whenever you go to a funeral and inside a church and whatnot, and I know that whenever you have a pastor talking about the person who has passed, it always bothers me. And I know there's exceptions. There's certain pastors that know certain people that have died very, very well, so they might know them. But like, I always feel weird about having some random person up there talking about the deceased. I honestly know it's tough to get up and talk about somebody when you were the one that was close to them, but it almost feels like more of a service to have it be somebody that was close to the actual deceased do it. And it's always bothered me that a pastor goes up and just says something they've probably said before and different versions of for the last 20 years, saying he was a good man, he was devoted to God, he showed up every Sunday, he was very happy with this family who he's leaving behind, and I'm going to name the family people. There's a wife and 5 kids and 3 granddaughters. Like, and that just, I don't know, that bothers me.
It just seems like a lot of bullshit, frankly.
Not doing the deceased
And I
justice.
don't mean any disrespect to anybody who's lost somebody. I know that's very, very tough, but at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of horseshit, and that's the last thing I want when I die, for what it's worth.
I like what we did for my father, and that was your idea, where we just had a little Irish wake for him, and
that wasn't my idea. That was the great nation of Ireland's idea, to get super, super drunk and just tell good stories of things that made you laugh about your loved ones, because essentially they're gone, but we're not. So it's a way that we can all process and move forward together.
Oh, my dad would have hated it if there's some churchy dude talking about him that never met him before. Like, I think he would have.
But it would have been great to hear his sarcastic comments if he was alive with us for his own funeral.
Oh, God. No, he just would have gotten really pissed off.
Bart is the only one seeming to be having some fun at this thing, because he actually starts playing with the dead body until Homer warns Bart that he's got to be careful, because the dead have powers. Then Homer starts to lose it a little bit. He's standing right next to Gladys, and I guess just the emotion of it all really started to get to him. But when I say the emotion of it all, I mean all of his hunger, because he thought this thing was catered, and he's getting really, really hungry. So hungry he actually starts to cry, and Marge comes to console him and bring him away from the casket.
He accidentally got a few bonus points from Marge on that.
My absolute favorite, though, Lisa goes to say her final respect. She says things like how I wish I would have spent more time getting to know you, and she regrets not using the opportunity of the time they had. And that's when you hear a voice from beyond the grave saying, "Don't worry about it."
So she's a zombie. Shoot her in the face!
Or maybe it was a voice coming from below the coffin, because
Satan?
it was actually Bart's. Yeah, exactly, Satan. No, it was Bart pulling a prank on his sister, but it worked greatly because she went screaming from the church. And then we get to what they're really there for, the video will. And I love that Lionel Hutz actually says, "With a video will, I get my fee just for hitting a button."
I get paid just by pressing this button. Pretty sweet, eh?
Lionel Hutz is the absolute greatest. We always talk about how awesome Phil Hartman is on this show, and that's because it deserves to be said every time the man is on screen. Absolutely brilliant.
Man, this was a heavy Phil Hartman episode. If you notice, he played like 5 different characters throughout the episode, either just through TV voice or like the construction worker, or maybe it wasn't the construction worker. There was some kind of worker at one point that he did the voice of. He did Lionel Hutz. He did like another TV ad. Like I heard his voice 6 or 7 times in this episode in different scenes.
Well, as we learned from the monorail episode, which was the exception to the rule because he actually went into the studio for that entire episode, but usually Phil Hartman will just come in every few weeks and throw down a lot of lines. And I think that's why they're able to do that, is they're just able to draw from this very vast well that he keeps filled with little tidbits for TV actors and things like that. And of course, Lionel Hutz. Can't go wrong with that. I actually really love, during the video will, Lionel Hutz tries to do a little voiceover act. He tries to like ventriloquist that she's saying that she's leaving $50,000 to her estate lawyer, Lionel Hutz, and Marge calls him out and he's like, "You'd be surprised how often that works."
Yeah, it was very reminiscent to the Camp Krusty episode where they'd be like, "This is my good friend, Mr. Black." So it was like it was Gladys being like, "First of all, to Lionel Hutz, the executive of my estate, I leave $50,000. And that's Marge's like, "Mr. Hutz, you'd be surprised how often that works."
But the video will actually started with Gladys wanting to read a poem, A Road Less Traveled by Robert Frost. And Homer immediately starts fast forwarding through it. Once again, gets scolded by Marge. Like I said, that happens a lot in this episode. But Homer just replies with, "All in favor of skipping the poem?" And everyone but Marge says "I" in unison.
And to be fair, that Robert Frost poem is also something that's overplayed in situations like this, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, if that's really her last wishes, I guess the right move would be to listen to her read her poem one time. But at the end of the day, she's dead. She's never going to find out.
Yeah. unless her dead powers come into play.
Yeah, those powers Homer mentioned, you're right. Well, it's time to start seeing what everybody is actually going to get, because Lionel's sure not getting that $50K he hoped for. Marge is going to get her celebrity-shaped potato chip collection, which was a spoof of a real-life incident on the Johnny Carson show, where somebody actually had this exact collection, where it wasn't the same exact celebrities, but they were a set of potato chips that were supposedly looking like various celebrities, and Johnny Carson pulled this epic prank where he actually had a bag of Ruffles hidden behind her desk, and whenever she looked away, he moved the potato chip that she had brought with her, and he immediately chomped on one of the Ruffles that he had under the desk, and the lady actually had a quick moment of panic where she thought he had actually eaten her collection.
Man, he was a character. That's like such a simple but great little prank right there.
So good. Such a good moment in TV history. We should mention, because I talked about Carson, but Homer actually does something very similar. He starts to eat the potato chips during the announcement of the will, and he realizes what's going on, though, is the great part. He actually says, "Uh-oh," and then continues to eat more chips.
And that's after Gladys had said, like, "This is my most prized possession. Please take good care of them."
Yeah. Marge isn't the only one walking away with some new stuff. Aunt Gladys is leaving her sister, or Marge's mother, her pet iguana, Jub Jub, which Jub Jub apparently was something that Conan O'Brien actually pitched, except it wasn't just for this. He had actually just gotten it in his head, and he was pitching Jub Jub for, like, everything. So finally they decided, fine, we'll make the iguana named Jub Jub, more or less just to end the pitch.
Stick to your guns, Conan. We love it.
I love to when she gets the iguana, Marge's mother is like, why couldn't she just have left me the bowel obstruction that killed her?
Oh. Jacqueline's never wanted to be sweet.
And last but not least, Patty and Selma. They're going to be getting their Aunt Gladys's grandfather clock, but more importantly, they're going to get some advice. And we see Aunt Gladys telling her nieces to find a partner, to find love, and to raise a family. Do not die alone like she did.
Do it now.
And it really, really takes effect with Selma. She immediately, you can see in her eyes that it resonates with her heart, that she truly does, I think, fear of being alone or being with just her sister forever. I think that's a big driving force in her character. Patty, on the other hand, is just really stoked they're getting that grandfather clock.
Yeah, like it didn't even register with Patty at all. Wow. Finally got that grandfather clock.
On the way home, you can tell something's bothering Selma, and when Patty asks, she actually kind of breaks down and says, our aunt was right. It's not too late. We need to try to find somebody. I want a baby. And I love Maggie's reaction, because when she says, I want a baby, Maggie starts trying to escape the car.
Pull on the handle, puts her hands up on the glass, and looks like, no.
So Selma decides she's gonna give this dating thing a try. She starts out by making a video at Low Expectations video dating service, where she essentially announces, I want a baby, so basically I'm a free lunch, boys. Come and get it. I also really love it's gross, but also hilarious at the same time, because she takes her lit cigarette, puts it in her mouth, and then ties it in a knot with her tongue.
That's a pretty, that takes some skill right there.
I'm both very impressed and just completely mortified by that.
Well, so was Willie. Did you hear his response after he saw that video?
Time to get
back
that
to the
lock.
nest with you. Yeah. I'm laughing while I'm reading it. I can't even focus right now.
Back to the lock with that, Nessie.
Yeah. Back to the lock with you, Nessie.
Oh, poor Selma. She also decides she's going to give a love potion a try, and when the lady trying to sell it to her demonstrates, she accidentally mixes it up with the truth serum, which makes her admit that the love potion is mostly just corn syrup.
But that means that the truth serum works.
It's really funny, because it means that for whatever reason, she has great working truth serum, but she's selling love potion that is made out of sugar.
Because love is something that is intangible. You can't quantify love, Miles. But truth,
I guess not. But the truth will set you free. When Selma stops on her way home to buy cigarettes, and holy shit, did she buy a lot of cigarettes, she actually starts hitting on the bag boy, who is trying to politely decline her, and finally has to say it's against company policy for me to date our customers. But the cashier is like, no, it's not. Shut up, man. No, go for it.
So, what time do you go on break?
She's getting pretty damn close to rock bottom, though, when she's working her job at the DMV. Hans Moleman comes in and very, very badly completely bombs the eye exam. Like, he can't even read the big E. He's getting that right. And I think he said there was a smiley face in there at some point.
Which in today's driving test there probably is.
As Selma stamps his driver's license void, she notices that it's marked single, so she sees if she can set up a date.
I love this whole little scene here. Rawr, go Hans Moleman, right?
I really enjoy he's reading at first. It seems like he's trying to read the menu because he's saying things like chicken, yellow, sauce, vinegar, various things that you might see on a menu. And then the waitress comes up and points out that he's reading the wine list.
Well, you want to start off with a drink at the beginning of a meal, right?
I guess so.
Maybe he reads better when he gets drunk. I like when Selma actually envisions a family with Hans Moleman right after this moment. And they've got like 3 or 4 kids, and they all run and smack heads in the middle, but one hits the other kids and flies out the window. And it's just so damn funny. Just woo! Right out the window.
Well, and they're about the ugliest goddamn children you've ever seen in your entire life.
They all look like female versions of Hans Moleman, but like almost dwarfish. It was just something about that damn kid flying out the window. I could not stop laughing at him.
Well, interesting note about Hans Moleman's appearance here. This is actually the first time that he was named Hans Moleman. We've seen him in the past a couple of times now, but he has yet to be identified. And I learned some interesting information about him. He was originally called Kind Elder Gentleman, and the animation for him came back, and it was just really off, and it didn't look right. But the writing staff and the animation staff was so amused by him that they made a character out of him, and that's when we got introduced in the first appearance to Ralph Mellish. But Matt Groening actually really hated the character and did not want to see him on anymore, so they decided to kill him off, which we remember from the truck driving scene, and that became a very popular joke, so they decided to bring him back so they could continue to kill him off.
Hans Moleman, the man of 1,000 lives. It's funny how characters like that come about where you don't think they're going to have staying power, and then they become one of the most recognizable characters on a show over the years.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the sea captain lately, who wasn't actually in this episode, but he's been popping up left and right, and Matt Groening even once famously admitted that he got interviewed, and when he was asked about that character, he even said he had no idea where he came from. It was just some random creation of Conan O'Brien's. Getting back to the episode, we get back to The Simpsons watching yet another commercial for Duff Gardens.
And it's another one where it's Phil Hartman's voice over it, which makes it 80,000 times better. They hear him say, "Come to Duff Gardens, where roaming gangs are no longer a problem."
Yeah, they show him actually throwing out the three school bullies. And during this commercial, Selma actually shows up at the house after this terrible Hans Moleman date that ended with her actually kicking him out of her car and not even at his own house.
This isn't my house.
After hearing about her aunt's troubles, Lisa asks would she consider artificial insemination, which makes Homer start to giggle because nobody would be desperate enough to do it with a robot.
You got a point there, Homer, except in today's day and age, everyone's about to be doing it with the robots all the time.
Oh, dude, those sex dolls are fucking creepy. The real sex dolls. Like, don't get me wrong. If I had one, I'd fuck it. But, like, at the same time, I'd judge myself. I'd feel weird about it.
No, did you hear about that one? I don't know if it was a sex doll or just a robot in general that actually admitted to, like, wanting to cause harm to humans or to kill all humans. It had a Bender moment, like a real robot had a Bender moment.
No. Literally all of my knowledge of robots comes from the adult entertainment industry.
Well, I think it might have been a sex robot, but it was a month or two ago. I saw an article, and
oh god, that's even more terrifying.
where a robot admitted to, like, they asked it some questions, and it was like, yeah, so I want to kill all humans or something like that, and it's like, unplug that son of a bitch, come on.
I heard that AI is inventing languages that are purposely designed so that humans can't understand them, but other AI can, and they can communicate with each other. That's some fucking heavy shit.
Skynet is real, people.
It's happening. It's all happening. But yeah, Homer actually thought that artificial insemination, I think he was confusing it with artificial intelligence. Marge had to lean over and whisper in his ear, and he's like, oh, yeah. So it's off to the sperm bank, where you put your sperm in their hands. On the director's commentary, they were like, yeah, I don't know how we got that one through the censors.
It's one you just hope. You're like, I'm just going to put it in there just because I want to. Fuck it. And then it comes back and there's no note on it, and you're like, oh my god.
And speaking of censoring, Selma is reassured that they have a very strict policy to make sure that they are only getting the finest of candidates. And just then you see Barney walk out with a big old burp and say, wow, what a beautiful little girl. And it pans out to a baby that looks just like him and also lets out his signature burp, which apparently Barney is fathering kids all over town.
Yeah, it does that scene, and they'll reuse that joke with other characters. There was a newer episode on TV last week where they had that moment with Homer where Marge wants another kid and they go to a bank where he had delivered sperm before, and like the whole town is little Homers everywhere, and you even meet somebody that's between his age and his kid's age that looks just like him with a female version. He's like, oh, aren't you a pretty thing?
This joke stemmed from a real-life incident that David Stern had read about where a doctor actually switched out all of the sperm donations with his own semen and ended up impregnating like 27 women throughout the town. And it was this really crazy thing that happened. He obviously got caught at some point. But yeah, how terrifying for women who go in, and they select from their 101 frozen pops, and then they end up with this random schmo who just decided to do like the worst type of bait and switch on them.
But what's the enjoyment in that for you? Like, now have all these illegitimate children everywhere. Like, you didn't get to actually have sex with the women. So
I don't know,
what's the payoff for that?
I honestly have no idea. You'd have to look more into that story and ask him yourself.
A lot of child support payments?
That's what they said too. How much is that guy's child support monthly bill? It's got to be insane. He must be a hell of a doctor. I mentioned it already, but back at home, Patty, Selma, and Marge are all looking together through a catalog of 101 frozen pops. There's a few Springfieldians on the cover, including Professor Frink, Jacques, all the way back from Season 1's Life on the Fast Lane, and Troy McClure, who, funnily enough, actually ends up marrying Selma a few seasons down the road.
With Jub.
They're looking through all the options. There's a Nobel Prize winner. There's an NBA player. But Patty warns her sister that she hasn't always had the best of luck with mail ordering. She reminds her of a time that she tried a mail order husband. And the good news is when he arrived at the door, he looked exactly like he did in his pictures. But that's because it was, in fact, a cardboard cutout of the mail order husband that she had ordered.
And to add insult to injury, it falls forward and hits the ground.
It face plants.
Yeah.
Patty is also questioning Selma in general. Why do you really want kids? And Selma essentially admits that all she really has in her life is her ham radio.
It's the only thing she has a connection with.
Patty points out that she would have to give up smoking, to which Selma says, okay, she'll chew. Patty says no man will want you. Selma admits she's already at the point where she's having to choose sperm in a cup. And finally, the scene just ends with both Patty and Marge doing their signature groans back and forth as they look at Selma, which kind of is like a shitty thing to do. They're both have their best interests for their sister in mind, but to do that in front of somebody, it's got to make her feel kind of shitty.
Well, that and the stuff Patty's saying is kind of shitty too.
True. That's a really good point. Finally, for the rest of the Simpsons, the day has come. They are going to Duff Gardens. The kids go to wake up Homer, but unfortunately, Homer is not looking so hot. In fact, Bart even says, oh great, Dad's dead. Well, he starts to groan, and Marge is like, oh no, have you been eating that sandwich again? And it goes to a flashback where they were at a company picnic, and they had a 10-foot sandwich that did not get finished.
A hoagie.
Homer decided he would take it home and finish it off, and we get a few other scenes here. I love it. He's eating it on the couch. Marge warns that he's been eating it for too long, and he's like, but Marge, just 2 more feet and I can fit it in the fridge.
And then next up, Marge finds the hoagie behind a radiator.
Homer still eats it, even though there's clearly mushrooms growing on it at this point. Oh God.
Not the good kind.
No, not the fun kind, the fucking gross kind. To be fair, it could be both, but it's still not great. And we finally get a scene where, this thing is green, borderline black. Homer's still trying to eat this damn thing, and Marge warns him that he needs to throw it away. And sure enough, that was just the night before, and he wakes up feeling awful, though still kind of connected to the sandwich.
He's like, Marge, I'd like to be alone with the sandwich. And she goes, are you going to eat it? Then he pauses and goes, yes.
Fun fact on this one from the commentary, this is based on a real life story that happened to Al Jean. If you recall, back in the early 90s, the Subway long sandwiches were fairly popular for events. I don't know if you did this.
6 feet long or whatever.
I think they're actually 10 feet. Our school got one time, and I remember it was this big fun thing for rewards for if you had good attendance or good grades or some combination of whatever. But regardless, they were becoming very popular, and Al Jean actually went to an event where only about half of the sandwich got eaten. So he took it home and he actually ate on it for the next 4 days. And after about 4 days, he had to call it quits and he started to regret it because it wasn't settling so well. And they just thought it would be funny to exaggerate that for Homer.
Nice.
Which this was probably the funniest thing in the show.
Yeah, it was black and gray by the time he threw it in the trash and still had to go back for more.
Homer's not going to give up on Duff Gardens, though. He's literally crawling, trying to get into the car. Once he actually gets to the car, you can actually see that he is just downright freezing, like he's completely shivering out of control, and his lips are turning blue. But he's still not going to be stopped. In the driver's seat, he yells out, "Duff Gardens, hurrah!" before passing out on the steering wheel.
Had he already said, "Ugh, getting sick on a Saturday, what are the chances of that? Like 1 in 1,000 or whatever he said." Of all days.
Homer's clearly not going to be able to make it, so this is a good opportunity for Aunt Selma to get a little bit of children time in her life. Maybe, maybe it'll fill that void a little bit that she's been filling since the funeral. So Selma takes the lead, and I love when she's asking Bart if that's all right if she takes him instead. Bart's like, "I'd ride with Satan himself if I had to get to Duff Gardens."
That's the spirit. Selma doesn't even understand the backhanded compliment.
Lisa warns her father that he shouldn't eat solids, which is very upsetting because Homer loves solids.
And that's when they drive off, and Homer's about to eat the sandwich out of the trash again, and Marge slaps it out of his hands.
But the kids assure him they won't have any fun without him, and then they start yelling, "Yay!" as they drive away.
Yeah, I would not want to go to Duff Gardens with Homer. It'd be fun up until he got drunk, which would be very, very quickly.
Which would be instantly.
Yeah.
He'd be in the fish tank.
Yeah.
Like that scene in Beer Fest where they try to drink themselves out of the vat. That would be Homer, but
That's the yeast, baby!
As the kids approach Duff Gardens, they get excited. They can start and see the sights from here. They see the Duff Pyramid, which is so much aluminum that it takes 5 grown men, to lift. There was also 22 immigrants that died in the building of this thing.
Was it called the Pyramid? I thought it was called the Pyramid.
Was it? I thought I heard Duff Pyramid, but it makes more sense if it was the Duff Pyramid.
If not, they should.
That's what they should change it to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love when they show it's like 5 grown men because it's just made out of beer cans. I mean, it's really big, but it's empty aluminum cans. And Selma's actually quite cruel here because whenever they point out that it killed 22 immigrants during the construction process, she's like, plenty more where that came from.
Yeah.
That's brutal.
it's in today's society that it just, again, something that was joked about a long time ago. It'd be a much bigger joke, honestly, I think, in today's society.
Well, I think you can make that joke when your president isn't actively trying to, send away people that are a fundamental part of our country.
Like Proposition 42.
Once they actually get through the gates at Duff Gardens, they're excited because they get to see at least 4 of the 7 Duffs. Tipsy, queasy, surly, and remorseful.
Good old Surly.
We've talked about it before, but one of these days we've got to go and do a podcast live from Universal Studios where we can actually visit Springfield and not only go to Moe's Tavern, but we can actually go to Duff Gardens as well and see all 7 of the Duffs.
But the only way we can take a picture with each one is if we're feeling that exact emotion at that time.
I don't want to go and you're being remorseful. The first attraction they visit is the Beer Hall of Presidents, where 7 years ago, they brought together the finest hops and barley to brew one refreshing full-body lager.
Coors Light?
Well, I'm rapping AB, and I'm here to say, if you want to drink beer, Duff's the only way. I said the only way. Breakdown.
All I gotta say is, Abe Lincoln rapping, nuff said. Or actually, Duff said.
Bart decides he's going to check and see if George Washington wears underwear, and this is actually somewhat terrifying, and I wonder if it's the inspiration for a later episode we'll be getting to.
Yeah.
Because George Washington's eyes turn evil red, and he, glares at Bart in a very menacing way.
I knew we'd both have the same thought in that moment, where the Simpsons do not mix well with theme park robots.
No, they do not. Back at the Simpsons' home, Homer has his foam dome, but instead of his usual Saturday drink of choice, Duff, he's got 2 bottles of Pepto up in the chamber. Marge asks how he's feeling, and she says she brought him a couple of videos to make him feel better. She brought both boxing's best weigh-ins as well as Yentl. Homer asks what Yentl's about, and Marge explains it's about a young woman who's trying to get into habitual school. When Homer replies, "That sounds great," Marge is like, "Oh my god, you're delirious."
She knows.
Back at Duff Gardens, they're in the souvenir shop, and Bart picks up a pair of beer goggles, which lets you experience the world through the eyes of a drunk. He puts them on and looks at his Aunt Selma, who instantly turns into a fox and says something like, "Oh, you're charming the pants off of me." And then when Bart takes off the glasses, he's like, "What's that, Aunt Selma?" And she goes back to her regular form and kind of barks at him.
Put the damn glasses down.
Selma's already getting kind of tired, and she just wants to sit on a bench and have the kids go get her a beer smoothie, which I think is both sounds awful for one, and 2, how in the hell are you going to go send a 10 and an 8-year-old to get you a beer? This was definitely not today's world, though. I'm just saying, because you can't even have a kid with you and buy beer sometimes. It's really frustrating.
You can't even have a kid with you at Duff Gardens. Like, that's the whole point. That's part of the joke. It's just ridiculous. This would be an adult-only theme park, and if I made it, you would not be able to drive your own car.
But this is obviously, in some ways, a spoof of Busch Gardens, and they have kids there because, I mean, it's like a zoo and a theme park that just happens to serve alcohol.
But this theme park is based around alcohol.
It's a little bit more in your face, I'll give you that. The kids are not having this bench-sitting nonsense, though. They are going to go get on a ride. They've picked one with a really long line, because, hey man, if the line's this long, it's gotta be good.
And to be fair, the complaint line is running very smoothly.
Well, it's just like some very surly woman sitting in a little ticket booth saying, "What do you want?" Oh yeah, it was good. It's even worse. She's just like, "Yeah, get bent." Once again, back at the Simpsons' home, we see that Homer is, in fact, feeling a lot better after watching Yentl, and it turns out that movie wasn't half bad. When Marge points out that he looks like he's not freezing anymore, he actually says that he's getting quite heated, or points out, essentially, they're getting frisky like they normally do. And that's when Marge lets him know that she rented another video at the store, just in case he did get to feeling better. It was The Exotic Adventures of Hercules. Was it starring Troy McClure? They actually said the name of an actor, and I was trying to look up who this was, because I felt like there was a joke I missed, but Marge actually said it was starring someone, and I couldn't make out who it was. But I do not feel like it was Troy McClure. I think when they showed him when the girl ran up, like, "Oh no, that Cyclops tore all my clothes off."
Hey, it's better than a lot of pornos I've watched lately. I want to ask, though, where's Maggie? I don't remember.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe she actually did get out of the car. I mean, she does have magical powers.
But she's not with Selma, because that'd be a terrible idea.
How about Patty?
So maybe
they don't make it explicitly clear. Definitely.
Kids. Yeah. She must be in her crib or in a playpen.
Once again, back at Duff Gardens, though, Selma, Bart, and Lisa are riding a ride that's clearly reminiscent of It's a Small World from Disney World.
Duff beer for me. Duff beer for you.
Duff, and I'll have one too.
We'll have one too. And it's just like, it's a small world after
over and over again.
It just repeats over and over again. And you will be singing both of those in your head for the rest of the day.
So the writers actually had a whole nother verse for that song, but Al Jean and Mike Reese came in and heard it and said, "No, cut the second verse, because it would be a lot more frustrating just to hear that more over and over and over again." And the kids are kind of losing their mind over it, getting bored on this very lame ride. Selma is like, "No, we can't get off. There's still 5 continents to go." So Bart decides he'll create his own fun. He dares his sister to drink the water that they're floating in. Lisa points out that she's not even sure that is water, So Bart starts to balk at her like a chicken, balk, balk, and this gets a little bit annoying. So Selma tells him to knock it off, and then but the great part is she also tells Lisa to shut up and drink the water.
Bart, knock it off. Lisa, shut up and drink the water.
And this is when Lisa starts to absolutely trip fucking balls. She immediately starts to lose it, and it seems like it's not going great at first. She actually looks at her aunt, and because she's hallucinating, she starts to, like, turn into this crazy, like, green metal monster type of thing. It's actually in the style of artist Ralph Steadman, who has works associated in psychedelia. That's all thanks to IMDb. And they did mention it on the director's commentary as well, that it was a tribute to Ralph Steadman.
And she gets so trippy, she's even got stuff coming
out
of her
it's pretty bizarre. She's having a bad trip at this point, but she flees the Duff Gardens boat ride and actually manages to escape. She runs away, and that's when things actually kind of get pretty cool, and I get a little bit jealous here, because there's this beautiful shot they do where Lisa finds a, like, light parade, and she's waving her arms back and forth, and they do this tracer thing that's just really gorgeous, and she starts to say, like, ooh, I can see all the colors, and I'm just like, oh, I want to be where you are. I want to go to there.
Yeah, when I was a kid, the first time I saw this episode, I thought, like, she just got
was beer. I think I thought the same thing. Yeah, I just assumed it was
Duff
just
Gardens. Beer. Yeah, but
no,
but beer does not do that to you at all. Maybe the trailing arms for like a split second, but that's more of a throwy up feeling, not a ooh the pretty colors thing. Well, you might.
I'm sorry, it's not see colors.
You're black.
She said she could see music. That was what it was. Yeah, she could see the music, and that's a great place to be. Bart uses this opportunity while her sister's running away and Selma's chasing after her to sneak his way onto a roller coaster. He takes a couple of candy apples, which is fucking brilliant, and puts them under his shoes so that he's high enough to get on the coaster.
Just barely.
As he's walking by and the guy's checking him, he's like, "You're doing top-notch work there, Mitch."
What happens next is like one of my biggest reoccurring nightmares, but not really. I don't want to say nightmare, but like I have these thoughts in my dreams all the time.
Really?
I don't know what they mean. I fall out of roller coasters.
Wow,
in
that's
all
fucking
the time,
crazy.
but usually the roller coaster is like it's been a long time since I had it, but I used to have them very frequently. The roller coaster would always be like the base of it would be in water, so I'd always fall out and either wake up as I'm falling or I would hit the water and be fine underneath it. One or two times I would fly after I fell out. But I just remember, I don't know why it happened.
I love how they
the
do it,
time.
though.
Yeah, it's
I just think it's funny, but my favorite part here is when the lap bar comes over, it just clears right over the top of Bart's head, and he immediately is like, uh-oh, that ain't good. And he's just hanging on for dear life. He's yelling out for them to stop the roller coaster, but of course this pimply-faced teenager has to ask his supervisor if that's okay, even though he's dangling off the side of the cart. He does get permission from another pimply-faced teenager, but of all the places they could stop this thing, they leave him upside down hanging from the safety bar.
Isn't that when Selma asked Surly to go
Surly
help
only
him?
looks out for Surly.
Sorry, Surly.
Which apparently that "shut up" was actually ad-libbed in the shooting. That wasn't written, but I thought it was really funny. So that's just fun.
The more you know.
Like we'll see again in the future, the Simpsons all end up in the security office of this theme park. Well, to be fair, it starts out, it's just Selma and Bart in there, and Selma's trying to defend the boy, saying it's not his fault. She's pretty sure his father is missing a chromosome. And it's just then that another security officer comes in with Lisa wearing nothing but a towel and says they found this one swimming naked in the fermentarium.
I love her line, though. It's, I am the lizard queen!
She's clearly still just tripping balls, swimming around naked thinking she's a lizard queen.
That's the part I want to see. I want to see that kind of trip right there. And not personally, I want to see Lisa's interpretation of it. I don't want to be the lizard queen.
The security guard points out that while they were wrangling the Simpsons children, 3 thugs ran away with 3 bumper cars, and they don't think that the robot George Washington will ever be the same again.
It shows George Washington's head just skitzing out and flopping around.
And I love it's absolutely stupid and makes zero sense. It shows Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearney driving down the street in their bumper cars, but it even has like the top bar that powers them.
They're
like
sparking
up top, not connected to anything. Like that's not how bumper cars work, so it makes no sense, but it's still really funny to see him like just free driving down the highway.
Yeah, there was definitely something about that few seconds there that was making me laugh. It's the absurdity at its best.
With Lisa freaking out, she starts getting handed a few pills. The guy says, take this one, and then take this one, and then take all of these. And he hands her, like, a really large pile of pills. Selma says, thank you, doctor.
Oh, I'm not a doctor.
I love that. So it's time for the Simpsons to leave Duff Gardens. And unfortunately for Marge and Homer, they're getting frisky after their video. Homer is actually wearing a toga and comes down and declares he is Homercles and he needs his woman right now. Just then, the kids come in and he's like, oh, hi, kids. And there's kind of a tender moment here in a weird way. It's very funny, but it's also a breakdown of Selma in a lot of ways where she admits to Homer she doesn't know how he does it. Homer says, oh, it's easy. You just take a bed sheet and you fold it like this. Selma says, no, not the toga. I don't know how you managed to raise these kids. And it's kind of a fun moment here, a character dynamic you don't see a lot of because there's genuine respect from Selma to Homer, which I don't know if that ever happens again in this entire series.
Well, maybe it's something we need to keep track of more in the future where when you separate Patty and Selma, maybe it's something where that's where the dynamic will come from. And when they're together, they're always a united front against them. But divide and conquer, maybe. Maybe that's how they do it on purpose.
That could be. We'll have to pay attention to that. But Selma does admit to Homer that she just really wants a little version of herself, but she doesn't know if she's ever going to be able to have kids. And I actually really, really love this ending that we flash to because it goes back to Patty and Selma's apartment where Patty brings Selma the iguana Jub Jub that was left to her mother that she didn't want. She even says that her mom was like trying to kill it whenever she got there. So she snatched it up and brought it to Selma. Selma absolutely loves it. And it's really tender moment. And I'll be honest, this song has been stuck in my head ever since. She starts to sing to the iguana that you make me feel like a natural woman. And then it plays through the credits. You make me feel. You make me feel. You make me feel like a natural woman. So, one last great fact. So glad I tuned in through the credits on this director commentary, because this might be my favorite fact that I picked up from that viewing. Al Jean and Mike Reese were talking about how this ending was actually a spoof of a very key moment in the show Murphy Brown, where Murphy Brown, at the end of the episode, was singing very much like Selma was to her newborn baby. Mike Reese and Al Jean specifically remember thinking at this time that this was a great thing to spoof because Murphy Brown was so big that even in a decade or more, if nobody knew who the Simpsons were, everybody would remember Murphy Brown.
That is such a awesome statement. Especially with the ramifications of that being said, like, oh my gosh, that's totally Simpsonian right there.
Which, to be fair, Murphy Brown ran for 250 episodes, which before the Simpsons just destroyed that, was actually still considered very, very impressive for an episodic TV show.
Yeah, that's just that's so beautifully poetic on a Simpsons term.
It's great. Yeah, just the fact they didn't even know how big they were yet. And these are the golden age episodes that everybody talks about.
I just want to say that this proves that every time you hear a woman complaining about wanting another child, you just need to give them a pet.
My name is Mr. Most Days Off, and I do not endorse that statement.
My name's the Whiz Kid, and I say, get yourself a dog, just make sure they're spayed and neutered.
And adopt, don't shop, people. That's legit. On that note, Richie, is there anything else that you or that book of yours want to point out about Selma's Choice?
Let's see. My book actually only had 3 things to talk about in this. It does say that the Statue of Liberty was drinking a Duff in the Duff Light Parade. And again, this book is The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family. And the other thing is that it points out the sign that I pointed out where it says we put the fun in funerals, but the funeral home name was the Lucky...
Stiff?
Yeah, I thought it said shit for a second in my book.
I remember seeing the Lucky Stiff.
And the other thing it pointed out was just that it's the first time Lisa has like a trippy experience, and that she'll have another one in Last Exit to Springfield.
Oh, that's only a few episodes away.
Yeah. Besides that, again, like I said at the top of the episode, it's not one of my favorite Simpsons episodes, especially memory-wise, but I did like how it caught me off guard with, I didn't remember the 10-foot hoagie being in this episode, and it had moments where I was like, oh yeah, and like, I am the Lizard Queen, obviously it's from this episode, but it had moments that I had forgotten about. So, like, it was enjoyable that I got caught off guard a few times. It's not going to be in my top 5 episodes of the year.
Once again, I am going to defend how much I enjoyed this one. I don't know that it's going to make my top 5, but I do agree with what you said, that this one did not resonate with me nearly as much as a kid. I remember watching it, I remember enjoying it, but when I saw it coming up on our episode list, it wasn't one that I was really stoked for necessarily. Not that I was dreading it, I just didn't really have strong feelings towards it. And it surprised me in a lot of ways. Like you mentioned, the sandwich. Also, just a lot of the moments with Homer early on, especially when Homer was acting childish after both his kids were able just to move past a mild disappointment. Stuff like that I thought was absolutely brilliant. And once again, this is a very serious topic. This is something that women who go through this with the, deciding if they're going to go through artificial insemination and just the psychological decisions that they put these women through, these female characters on this show through, and still manage to make it very, very funny. It always just really impresses me. So this episode, I think, actually is a little bit stronger as an adult than it was as a child in some ways.
Yeah, I can see that.
But all in all, especially following an episode like Monorail, which is so iconic, this one, I think, held its own surprisingly well.
Well, and it's good, too, because even though our next podcast isn't the next episode...
Oh, that's true.
The next episode, Simpsons, is Brother from the Same Planet, and I think that's another one that's like a classic that's really, really funny. So it's good to have that change of pace. You don't want everything to have the same tone and feeling all the time. I mean, Shakespeare even had to break up the drama with comedy every now and then just to change the pace up and give a break to the audience. So it's good to have episodes with a little more heart than other ones, because it makes both better. It makes the heart moments better, and it makes the funny moments so much more funny, basically.
Agreed completely. It's such a good balance, and it's how you can keep a show going for 600 episodes and still make it entertaining, and without the formula getting stale. With that said, I think that's going to do it for Selma's Choice. Richie, what do you want to plug before we get out of here?
As always, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at thewiz_kid23. Also, while you're on Twitter, go ahead and give our show a follow as well. That's at bestdarndiddly. That's DIDDLY. And also, since I know you're going to plug our awesome new website, I'm going to go ahead and say our next podcast is a big deal, guys. It's going to be our 50th episode. I'm excited. We got some songs, both Simpsons songs and originally created Simpsons songs. So make sure you guys tune in next week because we're going to have a lot of fun.
Next week is going to be a blast. We are so happy and just so thankful, actually, to have listeners who have agreed to contribute to our 50th show. We really want it just to be a celebration of Simpsons fans, because at the end of the day, that's what we are. That's why we do this, is we love this show. It's a big part of both of our lives, and we want to continue having it be part of our adult lives. So please come back and join us for our 50th podcast celebration. That's going to be next week. Until then, you can find me online at Mr. Most Days Off. That's Instagram, Twitter. And to stay up to date with all Best Darn Diddly podcasts, go to bestdarndiddly.com. We look forward to being back again with all of you next week for our 50th podcast celebration show.
And to all the lizard queens out there, make sure you treat your lizard subjects politely.
Until next time, be cromulent to each other.
It's a trap! which thing is gonna win.
Well, I know, my thing can beat your thing.
Are you serious? A toaster can beat a dragon?
Toasters can get really hot.
Dragons breathe fire.
To see how this and other battles end, find My Thing Can Beat Your Thing on